Well, hello, supporters of Minneapolis Public Schools. My name is Heather, and I'm here to give you a little update on what happened at the Tuesday, October 24th school board meeting, which was a committee of the whole meeting. You remember that those are non-voting school board meetings, just meetings where the school board gets to learn some things from the superintendent and her cabinet. And this week at the meeting, they talked a lot about kind of some more nuts and bolts about school transformation. So there's been a lot of conversations over the last few years, especially in the boardroom, lots about declining enrollment, schools with small attendance, lots of conversations that were like kind of touching around these edges. And I know as I go to different communities and I talk to principals and educators, lots of folks are wondering about this conversation. And this was a pretty significant board meeting because in this board meeting, they really started to talk about some more like details, right? So some things you should know. They talked a lot about community engagement throughout the process of transforming our schools. What is that going to look like? Who's going to be involved? How would they know if they've done quality engagement? Then they also talked about something that I would just really want you to know, which is that they talked about doing sort of a school by school walkthrough or a site survey. And they were talking back and forth pretty openly about like who should be on these surveys, what are they looking for. If I were an educator or a parent, and I am a parent, but if I were volunteering at my kid's school and all of a sudden I saw a big group of folks walking through and counting classrooms, I would start to ask myself like, what is happening? Why are they here? And I would be nervous, right? And so it's important, I think, for our district and this board to really make sure that they communicate their plan, that they want to walk through sites, they want to understand what our district currently has, they want to know the challenges and the ins and the outs of our buildings, and then they're going to come back and talk to us about those findings. And so I think what the sense that I got in the room was that this was a board and a superintendent and her cabinet who really want to do this with full transparency. They really want families and educators to know this process is happening. But I worry that the plan for engaging the community won't be able to do that in a meaningful way. And so I would just say to the board and to the cabinet, you cannot over communicate enough with educators and with families and with students that you're going to be walking through schools and looking at things and that there are going to be those conversations happening in their child's school. I think it's going to be interesting. We're going to be having to pay attention. I think this was a pretty significant school board meeting, and it sounds like maybe there's some things that the superintendent could bring forward to vote for the next school board meeting. And my recommendation would be that you take the time to watch a few parts of this meeting for yourself. Really lean in and learn and listen to what they're saying so that you kind of hear it just for yourself. This was a pretty critical meeting. So you'll see in the comments that we'll put a couple timestamps so that you don't have to watch the whole meeting. As always, our goal is to make sure that you can catch up quickly on MPS news without having to spend quite as much time in the boardroom as some of us who like it more than others do. So check out those timestamps and then let us know. We want to hear from you. Like our coalition, our work is to be a strong communication tool between the communities and the district. And so we want to know from you. How do you want to know? How do you as a parent, an educator, want to know if folks are going to come to your school? What do you want them to see? How do you want to be able to tell them? What do you want to make sure that they don't see? Let us know, if you have concerns or questions, we would love to be able to pass that along to anyone who's interested. So thank you so much for watching and for listening and for caring about Minneapolis Public Schools.
Definitely will be supported by us. We'll be supporting community engagement also. So you'll see many of us there. And as we start to figure out, for me, as we were thinking about it and setting the context for each of the tables, we might even have a short video there that's like 2 minutes long so that the expert on the senior leader who's over that strategic goal area gets to start it even if they're not there, right? And maybe someone else is helping to facilitate at the table. So there will be help for the board directors in the facilitation. I also think you're absolutely right. this has to just be phase one. When we're actually talking about closing a school, that is a way different type of engagement that we're going to have to do with that community. So I think as we think about those access points, as we start to make decisions, we're just going to have to constantly be reinventing and adjusting how we're doing community engagement along the way. So point well taken. So, as we've begun to, I would say, dip our toe in the conversation about consolidations and school closings, one thing I talked about the last committee of the whole that I'm concerned about is that we have up-to-date information about making those decisions. One of the things that I don't want us to get or to put all of you in the position of, or for any of us to get in a position where we're working on information that we think is correct, and then we are having conversations as we get in the heat of conversations about, I don't think that data point is right, or I don't think we have enough classrooms, or did we consider that we need to have a prayer room in every one of our schools, or did we consider that we need a calming space, or do we need help, do we need spaces for mental health supports in our schools? We have, our operations team does an amazing job, and we have great blueprints, and we have a great starting point for that conversation, but we know that schools change, and that principals, teachers, site councils use their schools and their school space in many different ways. So we are proposing that we have a space study done, and that would consist of a walkthroughs that we're calling them. So understanding and update enrollment capacity. So is there enough place at schools? So we need to have conversations about how many classrooms per grade level, or how many classrooms at a high school or middle school that we should have, and that our ability or physical capacity matches our enrollment capacity at each school. So that's going to be really important for this conversation about consolidations or school closing or repurposing. We also need to understand how we're currently utilizing space and what accessibility of that space looks like. As we look at some of our buildings, we know are older and we have accessibility issues in some of our spaces, but we want to make sure that we know how that space is being currently used. And then as a board and as a central office staff, that we're having conversations about how much we're holding tight on about how people use our space, and how much autonomy that our principals, site councils, and teachers and students have at their site to use that space, right? So if we say that we are saying that we have a belief that every school needs to have a partner for mental health supports, then we have to have that space available, right, at every school. If we're saying that we believe that every one of our schools needs to have a prayer room, we need to build that into the solution of what we're looking for in the blueprint of our schools. And then we also need to understand what predictable spaces every school needs, like I just talked about. So what spaces do all schools need in order to really meet our community needs, meet our strategic plan, and really talk about having schools that have what they need, when they need it, in the spaces where we need them around the community. That's a lot. That's going to take a lot. And I think at the time, we're going to need to do those spacewalks. I probably have more slides here. What the process would be. So I do have a timeline, no dates, Director Surreal, but we're getting closer here. I think it's going to be about a 3-month process. We want to make sure that as we initially do these walkthroughs, we have school leadership, associate superintendents, and our building stewards from our unions at those. And then we also want to make sure that once they do that, that we're utilizing our site councils to review those, so that we all have a shared understanding of that. So when we do get to the really hard decisions, we can fall back on our shared understanding of what space looks like. And I think as being a person who's been in the district 26 years and going through multiple times that we've looked at this, I know that's going to be very important for us as we walk through. So we want those student councils and our site councils to be reviewing those, so we all have that shared understanding. So my proposal would be that as we move forward, that's something we talk about, and that the board, I'd love to hear some discussion about what you think about that, and then also that we talk about at the end, if we build that into a resolution possibly in November, and then we would get started immediately on this one. Our budget challenges are not going to be solved by closing a certain number of schools. I don't want to say a number, a certain number of schools, or that we're going to, cut 10% off department budgets. Those things are an easy way out of a challenging and complicated process, and it's going to take the real work to make those decisions. And I think we have the team that I'm looking out at to do that. I know we have the leadership out at our schools, and I know this board is committed to that. So I think we're in a perfect place to do this challenging work. So thank you for that.
So I love this idea of the walkthroughs, what you're talking about doing, and I'm really excited about it. And the transparency that you're talking about, making sure that every school knows that this is happening. My question about it is, I'm wondering if this maybe needs to happen first. Thinking like the way I'm seeing this and the way it's presented is the community engagement, then you're talking about the walkthroughs, and we're going to talk about some other things, right? Mm-hmm. And so what I'm curious about is if this maybe happens first before that community engagement piece, so you have something to take to the community engagement, so that you're going back and you're saying, we walked through this school where we're meeting right now, and here's what we saw. And we saw these spaces that were being used so creatively that they're like, and for student use 95% of the day, or whatever you're seeing, or let's focus on the positive there. But anyway, I think that would be really helpful in guiding those conversations and giving the people who attend something to kind of grasp onto and to talk about. And then you might even have a better idea of those harder conversations, like where those need to happen too. That's just my suggestion. I don't know.
A couple of things. I really like Director Norvell's thinking about the walkthroughs and then the community engagement. I think that is something definitely to consider. And it also makes me think a thing that's like an obvious thing that we all know, right? Which is that if the community engagement question is, so we're thinking about closing your school, what do you think? Like, there's no buy-in from people if that is the question, we know what the answer is going to be. Change is difficult, and most people are not going to volunteer for it. I wonder if there's a way, thinking about gaining information from walkthroughs and having some analysis of that information, if the community engagement questions can be more like, this is what we're trying to accomplish, this is what we're working with, what's the best way to do it? You know what I mean? Because then, people have to think critically about, well, if we're here right now, if we're at point A and we need to get to point B, what is our best path to do that? And I think that's a place where community engagement becomes real and authentic, because it's possible a path is identified in a community engagement session that we have not yet identified here. And that's when it really gets real, right? But I think there's almost like a pre-step there potentially, which is, do we all agree on B, right? So I think that's like, when I see the World Cafe, I'm just jumping back for a second because it connects in with the walkthroughs, that the questions that are in the presentation are really sort of like, what is our B, And so I think we should be really intentional when we're going out to collect community engagement. Do we maybe already have recent engagement through the work of our community partners, through engagement that's been done for the superintendent search, where we've actually gathered some information already about what is our B? How much more engagement do we feel we need to do to identify that before we can move into the phase of engagement of how do we get to our B? And I don't know the answer to that, but I think it's something really worth considering critically, because we have enough time to do this, but we do have to be strategic in how we use our time, right? The other thing that I would say pertaining to the walkthroughs is, as we know that we have we have goals both in terms of our ethics and the strategic plan, and in terms of legal compliance about special education and inclusion. And a huge part of that is our spaces. We've talked about this. I wonder if there might be a way to utilize any consulting from like TIES or MCIE or another organization to get some feedback in our, or maybe we have, someone here in our special ed department, I'm not sure, who we could utilize to really look critically and provide some consultation about use of space. I know when I'm walking through school buildings, I'm always thinking about, how could this space that's maybe not even utilized for special education right now be innovated to meet some of our goals around increased inclusion and decreased racial disproportionalities that we're really, really trying to take on. And so making sure that we have someone who's very practiced and skilled at that lens, so that that's integrated into this process. I think the other thing that I would say about that too is just, I haven't been in every building. I'm working on it, but even though I hope and trust that they're not used for this purpose at this time in this district, we do still have spaces that have rooms that very obviously in the past have been seclusion rooms. And it's incredibly triggering to even see the space design in that way. And even when I am in schools that I very truly believe are not utilizing the rooms for that purpose at this time, but I think of our families who bring their young kids into these, federal setting 3 classrooms and seeing and knowing that there is this door to this space that has this historical context. It's really hard. It's hard for me to be in those spaces. So if we could maybe look at how are we addressing those spaces in our buildings, I think that would be great.